Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters. I'm your host Mitch, glad to have you here. Here at the Commander's Quarters, we're all about Commander on a budget. Today's episode is going to be a Commander Quick Take. On episodes like these, I give you my initial take on a newly spoiled Commander from an upcoming set. I'm going to talk about a potential direction to take that Commander and possible cards to use for that build. I'll also go over some possible upgrades and similar Commanders to this one. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. And while you're at it, subscribe and review our podcast as well. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all of their support. But before we really jump into this, I just want to give a quick disclaimer. On episodes like these, it is just an initial quick take. This Commander is as new to me as it is to you. And because of that, I don't have a finalized deck built for this Commander yet. So the direction that I talk about today might not be the same one that I choose for a deck tech. And because of that, some of the cards that I'm going to mention might not be in that deck either. Alright, now that we're on the same page, let's get into it. Today's Commander Quick Take is on Erebos Bleak-Hearted. Erebos is a 5/6 indestructible god that costs 3 and a black. It has, as long as your devotion to black is less than 5, Erebos isn't a creature. And whenever another creature you control dies, you may pay 2 life. If you do, draw a card. And by paying 1 and a black and sacrificing another creature, target creature gets -2/-1 until end of turn. So in my opinion, this Erebos is pretty powerful. Paying 2 life for a card in Commander is not a big deal, and Black's got plenty of ways to get a ton of creatures onto the board and sacrifice them for value. Now, Erebos can sacrifice creatures for a decent effect. By doing this, you might be able to kill a small creature an opponent controls or even one of your own. But that ability does cost mana, and you usually want to spend your mana elsewhere. So you're going to want to have a lot of free sacrifice outlets in this deck. I think this Commander is really going to shine in an aristocrat-style strategy. As an indestructible enchantment, it's a value engine that's very hard for your opponents to deal with. Yes, it probably will become a creature at a certain point, but with this deck, you'll be able to sacrifice creatures to make sure it's not a creature when it counts. Like I mentioned before, 2 life for a card is no big deal in Commander. In some ways, this is kind of like a free version of Greed. And with this kind of a deck, there's plenty of ways to gain that life back. Once you're set up properly, you might even be gaining life every single time one of your creatures dies. But now it's time for us to go through some cards to consider. Like many aristocrat-style strategies, we want plenty of sacrifice fodder. The more efficient our fodder can be, the better. So something like Weaponcraft Enthusiast is great because it provides us 3 creatures for 3 mana. It has Fabricate too, so when it comes into play, we can either put 2 counters on it or make 2 servos. And pretty much every single time, we're going to be making those servos. So at the very least, with the sacrifice outlet in play, this is going to draw us 3 cards for the cost of 6 life. Now, on its face, that might not seem too great, but we've got plenty of other ways to get value out of creatures dying. So again, 3 creatures for 3 mana is a fantastic deal for a deck like this. Another good type of creature for this deck is something like Reassembling Skeleton. By paying 1 and a black, we can return it from our graveyard to the battlefield. So essentially, this is repeatable sacrifice fodder for just 2 mana. We can also create sacrifice fodder in other ways like Sifter of Skulls. It says whenever another non-token creature you control dies, put a 1/1 colorless Eldrazi Scion creature token onto the battlefield. It has sacrifice this creature, add colorless to your mana pool. So something like this can be a fantastic way to gain value from our creatures dying. Not only does it create us creatures, but it can also make creatures that can sacrifice themselves and gain us mana. So essentially any non-token creature we have can draw us multiple cards from dying when this is out. Next up, we've got some more ways to gain value from sacrificing our own creatures. First up, there's Smothering Abomination, which is a 4/3 with flying, and it says at the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice a creature. Whenever you sacrifice a creature, draw a card. Sacrificing a creature on our upkeep is actually a good thing for this deck. And then from now on, whenever we sacrifice a creature, we're drawing 2 cards instead of 1. So now essentially we're getting 2 cards for the cost of 2 life. And on top of Smothering Abomination, we've got other cards with a similar effect, so we can dig really deep into our deck. Once we're set up properly, the amount of card advantage we can get from just sacrificing 1 creature can be huge. Although it's not card advantage, Gate to the Afterlife can provide us with card selection. It's an artifact for 3, and it says whenever a non-token creature you control dies, you gain 1 life, then you may draw a card. If you do, discard a card. So this only triggers off of non-token creatures, but it can still be very valuable. First up, it mitigates that life loss by gaining us 1 life. And secondly, with that looting effect, it helps us replace those dead cards in our hand. One way to draw an absurd amount of cards, though, is with Villas, Broker of Blood. Villas is an 8/8 flying demon that costs 5 black, black, black. It has pay a black and pay 2 life. Target creature gets -1/-1 until end of turn. And whenever you lose life, you draw that many cards. So with Erebos in play, whenever one of our creatures dies, we're going to be drawing 3. That life loss is actually going to be helping us more than it's hurting us. And Villas can actually help us lose life on his own, so that can be used as well. The more cards that we're drawing, the better a board position we can make. But now let's tackle some ways to get the most out of our creatures. As I mentioned before, we need some free sacrifice outlets. Theros Beyond Death has a brand new one with Ghost Rider. It's a 3/2 horror that costs 2 and a black. It has when it enters the battlefield, you create a 0/1 goat creature token. You can sacrifice another creature to scry 1. Then it has escape for 3 black, exile 4 other cards from your graveyard. So essentially you can cast it from your graveyard for that escape cost. And then Ghost Rider escapes with 2+1/+1 counters on it. So there's a lot going on here, but essentially this is a recurable sacrifice outlet that also gives us a token when it comes into play. And it basically has that same Viscera Seer value since you scry 1 when you sacrifice that creature. Notably, unlike Viscera Seer, this can't sacrifice itself, but it still seems like it's going to be a fantastic card for this deck. Next up, there's No Rest for the Wicked, which is an enchantment that costs 1 and a black. It has Sacrifice No Rest for the Wicked, return to your hand all creature cards that were put into your graveyard from play this turn. So basically it can help us get some of our creature fodder back so that we can use it again. Perhaps an even better way to do this though is with Cauldron of Souls. It's an artifact for 5 and we can tap in and choose any number of target creatures. Each of those creatures gains persist until end of turn. So instead of coming back to our hand, those creatures are going to come right back into play with a -1/-1 counter on them when they die. This card can lead to some really explosive turns where we get a ton of ETBs and death triggers. And of course, we've got plenty of great ways to finish out this game. With all these creatures that we're sacrificing, something like Zulapar Cutthroat can finish off our opponents quickly. It says whenever it or another creature we control dies, each opponent loses 1 life and we gain 1 life. So this not only is going to drain all of our opponents, but it also mitigates that life loss from our commander. Once we're set up with enough creatures, it can be a fantastic way to take everyone out at once. Another great option for us comes with Ayara, First of Locthwain. She's a 2/3 elf noble that costs black. She has whenever she or another black creature enters the battlefield under your control, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. And then you can tap and sacrifice another black creature to draw a card. She can provide us a ton of value throughout the game in a lot of different ways. First up, like Zulapar Cutthroat, she's going to be draining our opponents at the same time as preserving our own life total. On top of that, we can use her to actually sacrifice a creature and gain more card advantage. Now, since we have the tapper, we can only use this once each turn, but that can still provide us a good amount of value throughout the game. With multiple drain effects on the field, this game can get really out of hand for our opponents. Another way to really take over a game is with something like Butcher of Malakir. It's a 5/4 flying vampire warrior that costs 5 black. It has whenever it or another creature we control dies, each opponent sacrifices a creature. Once we're set up with this in play, it's going to be impossible for our opponents to keep any creatures on the board. Overall, this new Erebos seems like it can be a very effective aristocrat-style commander. Like all the other gods, it can be very hard to deal with, and the amount of value it can provide throughout the game just by staying in play is huge. But now let's tackle some potential upgrades for this deck. First up, there's Blood Artist, which says whenever it or another creature dies, target player loses 1 life and we gain 1 life. So Blood Artist is definitely a staple in aristocrat-style decks, and that's why its price keeps climbing. Unlike Zulapar Cutthroat, this only drains 1 opponent. But also unlike the Cutthroat, it's going to drain whenever any creature dies, not just our own. And that can actually really make a difference in trying to close out a game. If one of our opponents is a bigger threat, we can just keep targeting them with this. With the amount of creatures that we can sacrifice with this deck, it won't take us very long to take them out. Another upgrade to consider is Yahenni Undying Partisan, which comes in at $2.83. It starts off as a 2/2 Aetherborn Vampire with haste that costs 2 and a black. It says whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, put a +1/+1 counter on Yahenni Undying Partisan. And then by sacrificing another creature, Yahenni gains indestructible until end of turn. So with the right setup, Yahenni can become a huge threat in no time at all. But more importantly, he's a free sacrifice outlet that protects himself. Again, being able to sacrifice creatures freely makes a huge difference in comparison to having to pay. Another fantastic sacrifice outlet to add to the deck is Ashnod's Altar, which comes in at $3.43. It's an artifact for 3 and it says sacrifice a creature, add colorless to your mana pool. So not only is this a free sacrifice outlet, it actually generates us mana for doing so. This can lead to some really explosive turns, allowing us to cast a ton of things in one turn and drawing deeper into our deck with our commander. When it comes to sacrifice outlets, this is probably one of the better ones for this deck. Another fantastic card to consider is Pawn of Ulamog, which comes in at $2. It's a 2/2 Vampire Shaman that costs 1 black. It says whenever it or another creature you control dies, you may create a 0/1 colorless Eldrazi spawn creature token. It has sacrifice this creature, add colors to your mana pool. So basically this is another but better version of Sifter of Skulls. First up, it costs 1 less, so that does make a difference. And it also includes itself whenever it dies, it makes you a token, but Sifter of Skulls doesn't. The tokens it makes are smaller since they're 0/1s instead of 1/1s, but that really doesn't matter. You're just going to be sacrificing them anyway, so their power is pretty irrelevant. An absolutely brutal upgrade for this deck is Dictative Erebos, which comes in at $6.30. It's an enchantment with flash that costs 3 black. It says whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent sacrifices a creature. So basically this is a cheaper version of Butcher of Malakir that has flash and it's an enchantment. So it's easier to cast, can come out of nowhere, and it's harder to deal with. Again, with this in play, it's going to be nearly impossible for your opponents to keep any creatures on the board. A final upgrade to consider is Thrilling Encore, which comes in at $2.64. It's an instant for 4 and a black, and it says put onto the battlefield under your control all creature cards in all graveyards that were put there from the battlefield this turn. This is just a card that can really swing the game into your favor in a lot of situations. If someone tries to wrath the board, congratulations, you get all the creatures on the board. But even without a wrath, this card can really synergize with your deck by getting you back all those creatures that you're sacrificing. It's a flexible card that can provide you a ton of value or just even win you the game outright. But now that we've gone through some cards to consider and potential upgrades, let's touch on some similar commanders. The first one is going to be the first iteration of this god, which was Erebos, God of the Dead. This card is very similar in a lot of ways. It has the exact same mana cost, and its power and toughness are 5/7 instead of 5/6. It has your opponents can't gain life, and by paying 1 and a black and paying 2 life, you draw a card. The new Erebos can essentially do that exact same thing by sacrificing a creature for that 1 in a black. Now, the new one doesn't prevent opponents from gaining life. It also doesn't depend on mana to draw cards. So in my opinion, I definitely think the new one is going to be more powerful. Regardless, with these similar commanders, you might find some cards from them that you might be able to use in your deck as well. Another comparable commander is Yawgmoth Ran Physician. It has pay 1 life, sacrifice another creature, put a -1/-1 counter up to 1 creature, and draw a card. So like the new Erebos, this is going to draw you cards at the cost of life and sacrificing a creature. Next up, there's the Zoni Thousand Eye, which can also sacrifice creatures to draw cards, and it's going to gain you life, but it does cost you mana to sacrifice those creatures. And with free sacrifice outlets, Erebos doesn't really need mana to draw cards. Another commander to look to is Krav the Unredeemed. By paying a black and sacrificing X creatures, target player draws X cards and gains X life. So this is the draw engine as well as the sacrifice outlet, but you do have to pay for it, even though that cost is minimal. And finally, another god that we can look to is Bantu the Glorified. By paying 1 in a black and sacrificing another creature, we scry 1 and then each opponent loses 1 life and we gain 1 life. So Erebos is definitely more powerful than this one since it's drawing you cards instead of just scrying. And again, with free sacrifice outlets, you're also not technically paying to draw. And if you haven't seen it yet, make sure you check out my most recent quick take here. And with that, this show is coming to a close. So in the comments below, give me your take on this newly spoiled commander. Would you take it in a similar direction or in a completely different one? And make sure you're following us on social media for more updates and sneak peeks on future episodes. Again, a huge thank you to my patrons who help make this show possible. I truly couldn't do any of this without your support. If you want to support this channel directly, consider becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, including being able to vote on future commanders for deck tags. There are even tiers where you get your own personalized deck tag dedicated to you. You can check out all the Patreon tiers and rewards at patreon.com/commandersquarters. If you haven't already, make sure that you like and subscribe to the channel. Here at the Commander's Quarters, we're all about budget commander. So while you're at it, go ahead and check out some of our other types of episodes. And with that, I'm out of here. Thanks again and have a good one.